Have you ever thought that at any moment in your life you're being watched? Even now, in this very room.
So, me and another guard became pretty good friends and would often talk to each other over the phone and earpiece for most of the night while patrolling. One time, he found a door to the basement of the oldest building in our state or city or something like that, and the basement was also infamously haunted. Now, he hadn't said anything about what he was doing other than which building he was at, and we had been silent for a few minutes when I heard over the phone the word door being whispered or hissed in a drawn-out way with an audible inhale-exhale at the end. At first I thought it was him and asked him to repeat himself, and he was confused and said that he hadn't said anything. I didn't want to freak him out, so I didn't say anything until after he had left the building about what I'd heard. He was pretty freaked out by it, and would have been very out of character for him to have done that to fuck with me.
About 2 years ago, while I was on a city-wide patrol, I entered into a mobile home community that we regularly had issues at. When I proceeded to drive down C Street, I noticed a structure fire from a notorious frequent caller's mobile home. As I pulled up, 2 fire engines roared in behind me. The occupant of the mobile home was an older, heavy man on oxygen. This man is what we call a frequent flyer, calling dispatch, complaining about everything, from a neighbor's guest being suspicious prowlers, to area kids playing in the street, and neighbors would call in on him a lot for harassing and menacing. After 2 hours on the scene of the fire, I was informed that the man was burned alive. The official report was he left one of his oxygen tanks on while smoking in his living room, resulting in a fireball. After a meeting with the fire chief and property manager to ensure no other structures were at risk, I was ordered to leave property and continue on to other locations. The next night, our dispatcher received a call with someone coughing, wheezing, and struggling to speak. The dispatcher was almost yelling into the phone to get information so help could be sent, as residents confused my security company for 911 regularly. After 30 seconds, the line went dead. Annoyed at the dispatcher for not having any information, I informed him, "Central, show me standing by while you do reverse lookup for caller information." This system is used to record all calls and numbers from previous calls for service for court reasons. The dispatcher returned over the radio, stating the line was showing disconnected. Angrily, I demanded for the dispatcher to continue to find the information. About an hour later, I was at the mobile home park when the dispatcher called and stated the number came back to a landline and not a cell phone. Knowing we received calls from very few landlines, usually businesses, alarm companies, or a few well-known older people from a handful of properties, I asked if the dispatcher was able to call back. When I was informed that they were attempting to call again, just then, parked in front of the burnt-out trailer, a muffled and distorted ring from an older rotary phone rang out from inside the shell. Because the structure was now deemed unsafe by the fire department, I called 911 for a fire crew to escort me inside to search to see if someone was inside. When they arrived, only a fire investigator exited the vehicle. After a few minutes, he came outside and stated that no one had been inside since the night before, and the seals that were placed were unbroken. I told him about the call from the landline.
"That's utterly impossible. All utilities were shut off due to the fire. We will be back out tomorrow to begin cleaning the site."
The fire investigator then left with no other words. I sat parked there for a little while longer, contemplating Whether it was possible or not the call actually came in as the system recorded it, or if the unpleasant old man was trying to reach out after his unfortunate accident.
Another one that was most likely just a weird coincidence. We were transporting a psych patient from an ER to a psych facility who was completely fucked out of his mind, mostly unaware of everything around him, and he was verbal but not making any sense, and in an almost sleepwalking headspace from appearances. The nurses had doped him up, but said that he'd been in the same mental state, just more agitated beforehand. The antipsychotics had only really calmed him down. The first thing he does after loading him in the vehicle and me sitting next to him was turn to me, appearing suddenly lucid and saying conversationally, "Well, you look like you're ready to bury another dog." The morning of, I'd found my dog had passed away in her sleep and I had buried her. After looking at me expectantly for a few moments, while I was a little confused and shocked, the appearance of lucidity on his face and eyes slowly faded away before he turned back to mumbling and rocking in his chair, trying to eat the bag of chips the nurses sent him with. Not the chips out of the bag, mind you, but the bag of chips. My least favorite building to patrol at night. Very often would have doors unlocked on my second and third patrols. After I'd found them locked beforehand, many times bay doors which required a latch to be lifted from the inside would be unlocked. The building had alarms attached to every door that I'd have to disarm every time I opened one of the doors so that they would work. The building owners were not concerned in the least and simply said that the doors did that, and that's why they hired us to keep them locked. If it had been employees opening one of the entrance doors, then I would have been able to see which employee and at what time they'd been unlocked, which happened occasionally, but I'd always been informed to expect that on nights it occurred. I'd also hear hissing noises, thumping from the roof, and the occasional bay door being shaken, as though by wind, but with none of the bay doors next to it being shaken. This place just creeped me the fuck out. The guard before me had quit at 2 a.m. after ending a patrol at the site halfway through. Literally, a few weeks after getting promoted to lieutenant, he drove straight back to the office and left his gear there with a letter of resignation and refused to return any calls. I had a friend who was good friends with that guard and asked him if he knew what happened. He just said that he refused to talk about it. Another time we were going to pick up a psych patient from an ER, and when passing the hospital morgue during either late night or early morning, heard loud sobbing coming from in there. We flagged down a nurse and told them, who called the hospital security to come check it out, and they found nothing. The hallway the morgue was in had a few other rooms that were all locked and closed, but the sound had seemed to be coming directly from the morgue.
A few years back on Halloween night, my security company was scheduled for a special event in one of our patrol areas. The Old North End neighborhoods in Colorado Springs is 89 square blocks of historic homes, dating as far back as the 1880s. On Tejon Street, every year, the community organizers hold a big trick-or-treat event. Old spooky houses, killer yard decorations, great costumes. It's truly a great outing. I was scheduled for the 8 hours that night, from 4 p.m. to midnight, because I was the only officer with an available marked company cruiser. The first several hours were pretty normal, helping CSPD locate lost kids, drunk college kids from the nearby campus, or drunk dads staggering around with their kids, and making sure no fights broke out. It wasn't until after 10 p.m. that the truly bizarre began to take place. For Halloween in Colorado Springs, it was surprisingly mild out, so I decided to patrol mostly on foot, just moving my car to a different zone every hour to hour and a half. Around 10:15, a small group of teens decided to try to scary clown prank me while driving to my next zone. This wasn't a good idea on their part. As soon as two of them started charging my cruiser, waving axes over their heads, I slammed into park and came out, drawn on them. They immediately decided to throw the axes down. One made a plastic thud, and the other made a metallic clanking. After both were successfully detained, and I was on the phone with the parents of one of the kids, I noticed from my peripheral that a lumbering figure with reddish-orange eyes was glaring from the shadows of an alleyway. Assuming it was another pranking teen, I shouted, "It's late, kid. Head home." After a few seconds more of glaring, the figure turned and disappeared deeper into that alley. Just before 10:45, I was finishing up with the boys' parents. They spent some time chastising them on how stupid they were for doing the scary clown prank, and how they were lucky nothing worse happened, like them getting arrested by PD. The boys left in their parents' car, and I headed to the fire station to use their bathroom. While there, after using the head, one of the firefighters was telling me that, since I was on foot, to look out for Ouija boards that had been set on fire in the alleys throughout the old North End. I thought he was just joking, as he handed me a Dr. Pepper, but he then followed that they already responded to 3 incidents in a 4-block area. I then went up to the elementary school and parked. I figured I'd check the alley heading south from the school's drop-off all the way down to the community's border. Not before I hit the mouth of the first cross street, a simmering board was found with the planchette, burning, standing straight. While on the phone with the firehouse, giving the location, I saw the figure from before, but slightly clearer. I acted like I didn't see him while I was still on the phone, so I could examine him. He stood tall, maybe 6.5 feet tall, a pale face with long sideburns, slicked back dark brown hair, and a jagged overbite. Most importantly of all were his eyes, that gave a glimpse of an orange-red glow, like raccoon or cat's eyes when light reflects off them. I told the station house that nothing was close enough to start a secondary fire, and gave the location once more. As I got off the phone, I shouted at the person, "Hey, do you know anything about this?" The figure began fleeing down the alleyway. In quick pursuit, I followed. "Central, show me in chase of a possible arsonist. Have PD meet at San Miguel at the mouth to the southbound alleyway." I chased and ordered the individual to stop, trying to spot him with my light, but I couldn't keep pace. He was clearing potholes, curbs, and hazards like they were nothing. He then suddenly stopped dead and turned. With an unnerving smile, he stared at me, almost menacingly. I pulled my taser, as I didn't know what he was about to do. And as my laser sight found his chest, and I was staggering to find my breath, he gave out a horrid hiss. I started to see red and blue code lights of the CSPD police cars behind me. Instantly, a flash coming from this creek blinded me, and I lost sight. I looked back and he was gone. The police slid to a stop and popped out around me. Seeing the flash too, some asked where the guy went and the other one asked why I fired my gun. I showed my taser was in my hand and wasn't discharged. The other 2 cops backed me up by saying they saw someone too, then he disappeared. But one of them didn't believe any of us. The 4 police cars then searched the entire old North End and surrounding neighborhoods. No one matching what I saw was seen. Before midnight, I went back to the firehouse to see if they had headache pills or something in the like. While sitting in their lounge area, one of the firefighters told me something rather odd. On all the burnt spirit boards they found, the only parts on each that were untouched by flame or damage were the moon symbol and the goodbye symbol. So I'm still wondering if what I chased was a ghoul, spirit, demon, or a prankster. Either way, I don't tend to walk down any of the North End's neighborhood alleyways around Halloween unless absolutely necessary.
Another site I would patrol at night was an outdoor theater at the edge of town. A body had been found on an undeveloped part of the grounds and was thought to be a victim of Ted Bundy, as the time and area of death matched up with when Ted Bundy was in the area and active. However, it was never proven. This place was creepy as fuck, and I didn't even know about the murder until after I'd been working it for a while. Now, I'm very used to being outside at night in a rural area where there's no electric lights, but this place had this oppressive darkness that seemed to absorb any light, even on nights with a full moon. I had to use a flashlight to be able to see anything, but even my flashlight seemed to have less reach and illumination there. Apart from the weird darkness, there was only ever one unexplained incident. It was the first night I was patrolling there. I'd stopped halfway through my patrol to have a smoke break and turned off my flashlight because the battery was running low. After finishing my cigarette, I went back to my patrol and turned my flashlight on and froze. Alarm bells started to go off in my head, but I wasn't sure why. I hadn't heard or seen anything, but I just had this strong feeling that something was off. Then I realized what it was. My shadow was being cast out in front of me, as though there was a light shining on from behind me. I yelped and jumped around, bringing my hands up, thinking there was somebody behind me, but there was nothing. I didn't see anything that would have cast my shadow in that direction, and I didn't want to fuck around to see if my shadow would keep on doing that. I turned my light off and returned to my car, using my much dimmer phone light to see because I didn't want to see my shadow in front of me again. I never had that happen again at that property, and later tried to recreate it in the same position, but with no luck. Other than that just being creepy and weirdly dark, there were no more incidents that I couldn't find a rational explanation for at that site. Although a mountain lion's screams and a guy proposing to his fiancée both about gave me heart attacks there.
So this morning around 2 a.m, while I was taking my break on my patrol shift, a very emotional encounter happened. It was a pretty average night up until then. New hires in training annoy senior and supervising officers, dealing with blacked out drunks, noise complaints, a normal Saturday night, Sunday morning shift. When I finally got on my code 7, lunch break, I parked in a parking lot that I normally take my breaks at during patrol shifts. This lot is in between an everyday gas station and a Domino's pizza. About 9 years before, when I first started working armed security, I had a very cool supervisor named Ray, and we quickly became friends. Unfortunately, the company we worked for at the time shut down and we were out of jobs. I went to work for another armed security company, but Captain Ray went back to work at that Domino's where he worked at years ago in high school. Ray quickly became the store manager, and he would give me free food when I was on duty in that area. As of 5 years ago, on the 10th of March, Captain Ray, struggling with his own internal demons, sadly took his life after a night of heavy drinking. 10 minutes into my break, I decided I wanted to have a cigarette and got out of my cruiser. Zoning out and barely paying attention to the radio as the lieutenant was ripping into another recently trained officer that was now solo. I just stood there, enjoying my break. After the radio finally went quiet, I started zoning out again. Just then I heard clear as day Captain Ray say,
Hey Stone.
Stunned, I looked towards the direction of the voice and see a person dart around the side of the Domino's. Charging in the direction, I rushed frantically towards the individual. I come around the side of the building near the front doors to the Domino's and saw no one in any direction. Looking down the street from the Domino's was the church where Captain Ray's memorial service was held. At that moment, my emotions fell out and I began to cry. I pulled myself together and returned to the cruiser. At that time, I started contacting my old team to ask if they remember the exact day he had died and not his memorial service. After several hours, after I was off shift for the night, I got the answer, and the other interesting note was that it was a full moon the night he died. When I was on my break, according to a moon phase webpage, the moon was at its apex for the full moon. As of 8 hours later, I'm still wondering if he popped by to say hey, or if it was all just an odd encounter. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. A huge thank you to the Sandman for joining me on this one. If you enjoyed his narrations, I suggest you go over and check out his channel. He has a fantastic voice and a lot of quality content. A huge thank you to the 2 security guards who kindly allowed me to use their stories. The stories I read were all from the same security guard whom I have read the stories of before on this channel. The stories read by the Sandman were from another security guard who was the author for all 3 of his stories. A very big thank you to my very first Patreon. I really do appreciate the support. If you would like to help support this channel, be sure to check out my store on Teespring. The details are in the description below. Also, I have started a Patreon. The details will also be in the description below. Thank you all so much for your continued support. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.